things. So even back then, there was issues in the church. But Peter, of course, we all know that he denies Jesus 3 times, even though he tells him he would never do such a thing. He was martyred by crucifixion somewhere around 64 CE during the Great Fire in Rome under the rule of Emperor Nero. Now, from what tradition says, and of course, a lot of this just goes on oral tradition, that he said he wanted to be crucified upside down. He saw himself as unworthy to die in the same way as Christ. He has been interred and buried at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Andrew is Simon's brother. Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. Dig up, learn a little bit more about him, but he was crucified on an X-shaped cross. They did not use nails. They tied it with rope to prolong his suffering. His remains can be found in Italy. All right, now we have James and John, the sons of Zebedee. James, who is also referred to as Big James, and John, their nicknames were the Sons of Thunder. We can find that in Scripture. John, of course, was the author of the gospel that we're reading now, and his brother James, called Big James. These two were quite the pair. James, John, and Peter were considered to be the inner circle. So if you hear me talk about the inner circle of Jesus and the 3 that were really close to him, it was Peter, it was James, and John. So James and John, the son of Zebedee, their father was a fisherman. Jesus brought them over about the same time he did with Peter. It all kind of happened around the same time frame. James was the first of the disciples to be martyred. He was killed with a sword. Herod Agrippa decided to gain favor with the Romans by persecuting the leaders of the Christian faith. So James was arrested, and here's a kind of a cool story that I found. It says, after James was arrested and led to the place of his execution, an unnamed accuser was moved by his courage. Not only did he repent and converted on the spot, but asked to be executed alongside of James. So James was buried in Spain. Talked a little bit about John. We know enough about him. Philip comes from the same area. He went on to be a missionary in Greece, in Syria, and eventually traveled to Ethiopia, where he was whipped, thrown into prison, and crucified around 54 AD. Now we're going to get into a couple of move on to Thomas first. Everyone knows Thomas. Everyone heard of Doubting Thomas. Okay, Thomas, he was martyred in India. He was killed there by a group of locals. He was stabbed with a spear. James the Lesser, or also referred to as James the son of Alphaeus. Little is known about this one. At the age of 94, he was beaten and stoned. Can you imagine beating up and stoning a 94-year-old dude? Well, you got to have some serious creepiness wrapped up in your body to start beating up on 94-year-olds and stoning them too. Sorry, I'm not laughing at you, James. Then we have Judas Iscariot. We all know about Judas. He betrayed Jesus. We're going to get into a little bit more about Judas in depth later on. Then we have Matthew. He was also called Levi. Matthew was a tax collector who later became one of the gospel writers. I taught quite a bit about how a tax collector was one of the most hated, despised people of the time. They were betraying their people and working for the occupiers. Matthew, once he was called and changed over into living for God, he went on to be a missionary in Ethiopia, where he was stabbed in the back by an assassin sent by King Hyrtacus. After King Hyrtacus had learned that Matthew criticized his morals. Shame, shame. Don't make fun of the kings. Then you have Bartholomew. And this is where things get a little sideways for me. But Bartholomew also went by Nathaniel. I did read that his full name was Nathaniel Bar Tolmai, so son of Tolmai. So Nathaniel Bar Tolmai was Bartholomew. I guess the Bar Tolmai came into the Bartholomew side of it. I don't know what nicknames they gave people back then. Again, not much more on Nathaniel. He was crucified as well. And then Thaddeus, also Labius or Judas. So there's 3 different names for that particular disciple. He was killed with an axe. So he was martyred as well. The only one of these well, 2 of these that were not martyred was John and Judas. Judas took his own life, and we know that John lived to a ripe old age, right around 104 or so. So that is the introduction to the 12. Any questions on those 12 guys? Yes, Sheila? So the question, I'm going to repeat the question because you told me you couldn't hear people sometimes. So the question was, did they calculate age the same way we do today? Ages were not really in Scripture. So the ages that I have derived come more from secular writings. So we can get better dates by looking at ancient Roman text that's not biblical. It's a secular text at the time. And I had read a couple weeks ago about where Matthew really spells it out of who was in charge when. In the beginning of Matthew, or no, it was the beginning of Luke. Let me find that for you real quick. Methuselah? Yeah, I believe so. Well, I think I think life expectancy back then was a little bit different. But, I mean, like, for this one right here, in the days of Herod the king of Judea, there was a certain priest named Zacharias. No, that's not what I was looking for, sorry. Okay, now in the 6th month, the angel of Gabriel was sent down to the city of Galilee, and I need to start reading before I start talking. Luke said somewhere in here about a whole bunch of Roman leaders, and that's how a lot of the time frame was established, because we know who was in charge in Rome at what time, because we still have those records. So then you can build that as the day, and then you can use other records to start figuring out how old people were. John was the oldest living. In Andrew, I think John actually might have been the youngest of the disciples at the time as well. He was the baby. I think he was only 24 when the ministry started. That's what I got from history. I don't have anything to quote on that, but I think the ages are very similar. I mean, they said that, Noah lived to 800 or 900 years old. Lord worked different back then. That's all I can say. Oh, I know. Okay, so we're going to get into John chapter 2. And I had discussed about this is the beginning of where John really starts to spell out the miracles that Jesus did. and we're going to talk about them and look at them in a different way. But the word miracle in Greek isn't what we consider today miracle, the word that was used. The better translation in my mind is going to be signs, right? So it says miracles, it's more of signs. And so what are the signs? It's really just as simple as thinking, I'm heading down I-75 and I'm going to the Reds game. I know what exits to look for. I know what signs that are going to guide me to that part. So as we go through the next several chapters and we're thinking about miracles, I want you to start to really think of these things not just as something that was performed to give God glory, because of course that's what it was, but it was also these 7 that John is going to really dig into deep. These 7 have very specific meanings, each and every one of them. They're signs that he's pointing to what's going to happen this whole time. He's trying to teach people. This is where they called him teacher, right? They called him rabbi because they were learning from him, just like I need to learn from him. And each one of these miracles, each one of these signs points to something. So we're going to take this chapter 2 from verse 1 to verse 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go through it real quick. All right. John chapter 2, verse 1, page 1399. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus also was invited, and his disciples, to the wedding. And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And then he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." And they took it to him. And when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom. And he said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then that which is poorer you have kept for the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed a few days. All right. So John begins this by saying on the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So the 3rd day could refer back to the previous chapter. So if we look at chapter 1, where John is pretty much setting out the story of John the Baptist and what took place, we can see in verse 35, it says, "Again the next day, John was standing with 2 of his disciples." So it's this day, and then it's this next day, and then it says on the 3rd day, there was a wedding. So a wedding back then was similar to a wedding now. When there's a big wedding, well, I'll just go to you guys. When you guys, because I was your photographer, and I loved it. It was so much fun. When you had your wedding, how long in advance did you plan? I'm talking to her, Scott. I don't expect you to know. About a year? Okay. And yours was a second wedding, and it really wasn't that big of a wedding. I've been to some monster weddings. I know when Vanessa got married, they started planning that thing out almost 2 years in advance. It wasn't much different back in this time. Weddings were the party to go to. They were the biggest parties, they were the biggest get-togethers, and they were a very, very social event. And when a mom and dad would put on a wedding, there was a lot of judgment going on. Everyone wanted to come and see, what's Sheila going to serve at the wedding tonight? Is it going to be good? Did they break out the good plates, and did they set this up? Did they get a good band? And there's a lot of judgment going on. So in thinking about putting a wedding together back then, it was such a huge deal. I'm sure it was planned out years in advance. So Jesus, for one, knew that the wedding was going to take place. Like, I'm sure it was on his iPhone. It pulled up, the reminder was there. He knew it was time to go. But he just got finished putting together his 12 disciples. So how were they invited? Now, my guess on this is that Jesus was probably on the original guest list along with his mother, because it says his mother was there. And when he showed up with a few extra, they were invited in as well. There's been I did a whole lot of studying on YouTube and different things I read about this. Some people want to say that by Jesus bringing the extra disciples, that's why they ran out of wine. I don't think so. I think it's just as simple as he knew he was going. He had some friends he was bringing. And when Jesus showed up with some friends, they said, sure, come on in. We'll figure it out. All right. Well, no, I think John probably included it here to tie it back into the previous chapter and to call out the fact that it happened in sequence, so the reader would know that the disciples were not on the original guest list. I think it's an important thing. So I'm thinking maybe that's why. I know that, or I personally don't believe that everything written in all of the Gospels are chronological. I think they bounce a lot. I think it's up to the reader to figure out where they want to put it, because you go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they don't all line up perfectly for chronological order. So I can see John writing his gospel with all kinds of paper all over the place. There weren't computers. You couldn't take those kind of notes and put them in different files. So I'm sure he was putting stuff together. I could just see a 94-year-old John sitting there thinking, now, when did this happen? Was it the day before this or the day before that? So, yeah, God inspired him, but I also think that they just put the stories in there as best they could. Sorry, I went on way too long about that one. So yeah, on the third day that happened. I think Jesus was invited. The disciples probably were not on the original invite, but his attendance was requested, and they wanted Jesus there. All right, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, what business do you have with me, woman? My hour has not yet come. So who else in here reads that and thinks, why did Jesus call his mother woman? Now, I didn't know that either. Hopefully I have an answer. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about the wine. So running out of wine was about the biggest deal that could have happened on that day. Like, if you had your list of things that could go wrong at a wedding, running out of wine was number one on the list. You just did not want to do that. A lot of these weddings took place over several days. So we don't know when in the wedding this happened, but having no wine is a huge deal. It's social standing. Basically, no wine, party's over. Everyone's got to go home. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, kind of thing. So why did Mary get involved? So they ran out of wine. Why did Mary want to stick her nose into this? I like to play little scenarios in my head and think that, this was the close-knit community, right? It was in an area that, knew of Jesus. They knew the family. Mary was more than likely held in very high esteem for, having that whole virgin birth and all. They probably thought about her as, someone who was a pretty nice lady to have around. And I would like to think that the mother of Jesus was probably extremely helpful wherever she went. Didn't matter if this was a wedding that we're talking about here or just something else. I bet that Mary wanted to help as much as possible. And she knew that the only one that was there that could help was Jesus. But she also knew that her son had not yet started with any miracles. Now, I'm sure that Jesus and his mother talked about it quite a bit. So he says to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" Excuse me. So he said woman and not mother. So there's a few things on this that I like to kind of think about. For one, she's asking him to do something that is not in the mother-son relationship. What she's asking him to do is from his father. So when he refers back to her as woman, this is where the separation occurs. If he's going to start on his signs and miracles and his signs and wonders, he's now answering to the Father. I don't think, because the word actually translated means more of a term of respect. It would be almost like saying, "my lady," instead of, "hey, woman." Like if I just came up and said to my mother-in-law, "hey, woman," I'd probably get the walker across the head. No. And Jim might get a kick out of it, but no, it was more of that, "my lady." It was a respectful thing. Very difficult word to translate from what I found. So I don't think he was frustrated. I think at that point he was really saying, "my lady, why are you asking me?" Because he knew that she knew that he could fix it, right? So he's like, "Okay, so what are you really saying here, Mom? Are you saying it's time for me to start? Because my hour has not yet come," is what he's saying. And he's also making sure to say, "I need to contact my father about this first. I'm not going to do what my mom is asking me to do because I have another authority that takes precedence over everything." And he knew, he's like, "my lady, you know why I'm here. Do you really want me to start by helping somebody out with some wine?" Well, apparently she did, and it seemed to work out. And we can only assume, and I think it's for very good reason, that Jesus not only said a few more things to his mom that John didn't overhear, and that he probably prayed, because Mary goes directly to the servants and says, "whatever he tells you to do, do it." So what took place that John didn't hear? I can let my imagination run wild on this one, right? Where Jesus at this point is going to say, "okay, this is where it starts." I love the fact that Mary got involved. Oh, absolutely, he knew. Oh, she had all kinds of faith. Yeah. That's right. But something else happened, because then she goes and tells the servants, he's going to do something. So whatever he tells you, if he tells you to stand on one leg and wave both arms in the air, just do it, because it's going to solve our wine problem. So she didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew that Jesus was going to fix it. Now there were 6 stone water pots standing there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 2 or 3 measures each. Jesus said to them, "fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. So I bet that Jesus, during his prayer time there, after he talked to his mom and realized, okay, I'm going to do as the Father wills. And this is when God gets involved. And it's so hard to talk about when we stand in the hallway talking about the Trinity. You know, they're all the same. But, you know, he still is going, the man, Jesus, is going to ask his Father in heaven what to do next. He saw the stone water pots, and I love the fact that he decides to get other people involved in his miracle, in his sign. You know, Jesus could have done anything he wanted at that point. There was the original wine jugs that were empty. He could have said, fill them up. Or he could have just walked up to those and touched them and said, okay, you got wine. But the way it takes place is just phenomenal. At this wedding, there were Pharisees. There absolutely was. It was a Jewish wedding. Everyone was invited. It was the town party, and it was also, everyone come see what we're going to do for you. So yes, there were Pharisees there because the stone pots were there. These stone pots were only used for one thing, and that was for purification prior to prayer, prior to going to God. And they were only used by Pharisees. So I'm sure Jesus probably figured out, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get this miracle thing going. How can I irritate the Pharisees right off the bat? I'm going to take their stone water pots from them. I'm going to take something that they use for purification, and I'm going to make it pure and holy for God, the right way. Because those stone pots of purification, that was just man making up rules. Moses didn't come down from the mountain and tell everyone, wash yourself in specific stone pots that are made by a specific person that have this kind of water in them. Those are all man-made rules. And Jesus is going to take those stone pots, he's going to use them for his glory. So he's right off the bat, how can I irritate these Pharisees? And they filled them up to the brim. They didn't just put some little bits of water in there. They filled them all the way up. Jesus did not add anything to it. He couldn't, because they were filled up to the brim. Maybe that's why they did it. Maybe because you got to think about it. This was 150 gallons of wine. This is proof that this is what I hear, okay? People refer back to this scripture and say this is proof that Jesus was Catholic, because they said make wine and he made 150 gallons of it. But it wasn't just them going outside, taking the hose and putting it in the water pots. They had to go to the well to get the water, and they had to dump them in a water pot. 150 gallons. That took them a couple minutes to do. And I'm sure they were probably talking to each other the whole way. What is he going to do with this stuff? Why are we getting water? I know, he's going to put something in it. Let's mess with him and fill him all the way up so he can't put nothing in it and trick us. That's why they write this stuff in here, because they were filled up to the brim. He could not add anything. He could only transform what was already in there. And then Jesus said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. And they took it to him. And when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn water knew, the head waiter called to the groom. And again, the servants, they would have had to have some serious faith to bring that to the head waiter. They just knew. They filled them things to the brim with water. And now they have to deliver this to the guy in charge. When you're a servant and you do something stupid, you don't just get fired. You get beaten. So I'm sure these servants had to have some sort of faith to be doing this. And this is probably why Jesus involved other people in this sign. He wanted other people to be talking about this. He wanted to leave no room for doubt. The head waiter would be the only real judge to test this new wine and therefore confirm the miracle to everyone. The head waiter had to test it, didn't know where it was coming from. And I'm sure that delighted the servants too. They had something up on this guy. They knew a secret that he didn't. The bridegroom is called out as the one who served the wine. But we know that Jesus is our bridegroom, right? The wine was supposed to be supplied by the bridegroom. And we find out that the wine is supplied by the real bridegroom. He just came from being tempted by the devil, where he was asked to turn stones into bread to feed himself. And he didn't. He only went back at the devil with more scripture. But here, he's asked to turn water into wine for someone else, and he does. And it just shows that when he's going to do a sign and a wonder or a miracle, that's not going to be a selfish thing. The devil asked him to turn stone into bread so he could eat after he'd been fasting for 40 days. That would have been something for himself. But here he's doing something for someone else. So like I said, it was right around 150 gallons of wine. That would be 760 bottles of wine that you would buy from Kroger. And it was the best wine. Why did he make so much? I think it was just another blessing for that young couple. Because when the wedding's over, whatever is left over, they would sell. Whatever food is left over, they would either give to the needy, and any wine left over from the wedding, they would sell. Could you imagine the price that they're going to get for this wine? Because the head waiter saying this is the best wine he's ever had. They're going to make a lot of money off that extra bunch of wine. So let's see, the head waiter called the groom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the guests are drunk, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have all kept the good wine until now." So now this young couple is getting incredible praise from the head waiter. And of course to the family who was there. This is just pure compassion that Jesus has for all of us. It was absolutely the best wine that could have been given. Then it says, this is the beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. And he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So Mary, she shows that we should expect great things from Jesus when we ask. And we know it's in his time and in his way. All we have to do is say what the problem is and not worry about what the solution is going to be. We put it in his hands and his hands only with faith, knowing that that solution is going to be what's best for us, even if it's not something we think of. I'm sure Mary probably had in her mind, he's just going to go over there, touch those 2 empty pots or 2 empty vessels, and more wine's going to be in there. But he did it in such a different way. And I think that's a really good point for us to remember, is that when we have something, when we have a need, we go to him expecting a solution, but not one that we crafted ourselves. The servants, they show us to obey without question, that even the lowest among us can take part in his ministry. The groom shows us that Jesus will save the day. The master of the feast, the head waiter, shows us that Jesus provides only the best. The disciples, they show us that they believe, and the miracle was real. The sign points to an internal transformation of the heart into the best possible person that we can be used for God's glory, because that's what he did. He took the ordinary and he put it in something that was man-made for a law that had nothing to do with salvation. He used that to, lost my train of thought. He used that as an example, those stone purification containers. He transformed what was inside into something wonderful that saved the day. We're just ordinary. We're just man-made. Jesus can transform what's inside of us as well. All we got to do is ask. So they invited Jesus to this wedding. They were about to be embarrassed in the biggest way possible, but Jesus stepped in. He helped. He had that heart of compassion. He saw a need, and he acted on it. And he did it in a way that we can all learn from it, that we can all understand about it. Now, Amy's not here tonight, and I'm going to end with this, because we're done with the... Well, let me see if there are any questions on the miracle with the wine and everything that I covered tonight. Did you get something out of that? Yes. Oh, yeah. There was a problem, and Mary took it to him. Yeah. Can you help? Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. It would be like his first miracle. Yeah, but the way she approached him, it would almost be like the church needs new cameras, right? I don't know how much Mark, how much the camera's going to cost? About 12 grand? Okay, we'll say $10,000, $12,000. That's a bunch. But if I was really good friends with Elon Musk, and I asked Elon Musk for 12 grand for cameras, I know he can do it. Absolutely, I know he can do it. 12 grand is nothing. That's like me fishing a nickel out of one of my jars, right? It's absolutely nothing to him. And she went with that much confidence. They're out of wine. Yeah. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she asked him a couple times, and he had to pray. And about 30. Yeah, he started his ministry around 30 and was crucified around the age of 33.
That definitely is the first miracle we know of.
Yeah, this is the first miracle. John, he calls it out plain as day. He absolutely makes a point to say, this is the beginning of the signs. You know, and I think the whole thing, there's so much you could take out of that, and so much I was able to find in there. But to me, it's all about inviting Jesus in, knowing that you want his presence, and that when his presence is with us, and when he's invited in, he's going to take care of stuff for us. I like that part of it. Actually, I love that part of it. Anything else? Good point, everyone. So we're also, Amy and I are watching The House of David on Amazon. And if you haven't, did you have something, sir? Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, if they did not know, that this was his brother, then, how would really Mary, Mary knows because of the angel, but you see what I'm trying to say? How could they not have known?
Jesus kept everything very, very quiet about who he was. He did not make it about him. So I'm sure growing up, he was perfect, but he didn't flaunt it. He didn't throw it in his brother's faces. And the brothers didn't even really know what was next for Jesus, even when he began his ministry. They're thinking, my crazy brother, who's supposed to be a carpenter, is now preaching out in the streets. He's nuts. That's their approach. He wasn't the son of a Pharisee, wasn't the son of a priest. He was the son of a carpenter. He wasn't supposed to be out preaching. So they didn't, at that point, they just think, my brother's a nut. And when he came out as the Messiah, they didn't believe him. They were part of the group that said, you're crazy. They didn't believe until after he was resurrected. Right. Oh yeah. We're gonna hit that pretty good.
Yet the Pharisees and all them were still kind of hunting him down, trying to find out where he was and everything else because of what he was doing, saying about their laws and all that. They were still trying to get to him. So I mean, I'm sure word spread. I mean,
Yeah, and at that point, his brothers were also trying to stay out of trouble. They didn't want to be involved in that guy. Oh yeah, yeah, big time. He was hitting them in the pocketbooks. Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely do. Okay, so I was going to say, we're watching the House of David. Really interesting show on Amazon. And we've also been watching The Chosen quite a bit. And she knows the kind of studying that I do and how much I absolutely bore her to tears with my History Channel stuff. She asked a question while we were watching The House of David, and her answer put me in my place. It hit me pretty hard. She didn't even, if she's watching tonight, I don't know, but I don't even think she realized how much it hit me. And this was just such a beautiful story. I wanted to share it with you. So I do a lot of my history. I think that when I'm up here and I'm teaching, I almost at times feel like a lawyer going through my closing statement, trying to convince everyone that Jesus is the Christ, right? When I do my teaching, that's kind of the approach I take. It's I want to dig and I want to find this and I want to find that. I want to find this one stone that was unearthed 2,000 years ago that mentions David or mentions Saul or Solomon or something along those lines and really brings the Bible more to life because I love that history of it and I dig deep into it. And her question, I found myself saying, well, yeah, because, you know, back when this took place in Greece, we know that Cleopatra was still alive, and I'm going to all this history. And she's like, wow, I didn't know all that. I just believed. I was ashamed. I'll be honest. I sat there and I'm thinking, here I am digging and digging. And all she has to do is say, I just believed. There's a lot to that. So as we move on into the second part of chapter 2 and on through the miracles, it really goes hand in hand with what John tells us. And I'll close with this. What John tells us in chapter 20. I think it's chapter 20. Yes. And he says in chapter 20, verse 30, many other signs, therefore, Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. All she ever did was read the Bible. She didn't like history. She didn't want to look at history. She read the Bible and she believes. And I think that really goes a long way. And I just love that. I wanted to share that with you. So thank you. Have a good evening. And yes, sir, in the back.
baptized.